My husband walked in on me cheating on him with another man, and his reaction was intense. Consequently, he was sentenced to 7 years in jail, and now my entire family despises me. I've shattered our once happy family, and I can't help but acknowledge that my actions were selfish. I repeat this self-condemnation almost every night as I sit in the silence of my empty home. My children are not with me, and understandably, my ex-husband harbors deep resentment towards me. My immediate family is divided, and I've never stopped hating myself for what I did. My selfish act took place in 2015, and I've just turned 39. Reflecting on my past, I realize I didn't fully appreciate my ex-husband. He consistently praised my looks, paid attention to our intimate life, and cared for me, treating me as an equal partner rather than putting me on a pedestal. Our relationship, spanning 20 years, began as high school sweethearts and evolved into a deep, exclusive love. Our bond felt natural and right, earning him admiration from my family. My brother, in particular, revered him for his guidance during tough times. He was a man others relied on in their moments of need, always ready to lend a hand. Throughout our years together, he was a genuinely good person, and we raised 2 determined boys. At the time of this incident, our children were in their teenage years. I had gained weight and felt self-conscious, but my ex always reassured me of my beauty. We rarely argued, but when we did, it usually centered around our sex life, or rather, my lack of interest. The things I declined to do in bed were not due to a lack of desire, but more a matter of not being in the mood, something he understood. When I turned 39, my birthday marked a new phase for me. I had spent a year in the gym, practicing yoga and Pilates, and my efforts had transformed my body from 180 to 135 pounds. This was a significant change for me, as I had always been on the heavier side. My ex-husband had also joined me in the gym, albeit less frequently, and he had managed to shed some weight, going from 260 to 225 pounds, sculpting his physique. Despite my improved appearance, my ex-husband couldn't keep his hands off me. However, for some inexplicable reason, I still wasn't in the mood. He tried everything, taking me out to dinners, dancing, and going on regular walks. He continued to help around the house, and his eyes still held the same love and desire for me after 2 decades together. Any woman would have longed for that kind of attention. But mentally, I remained disinterested. At the time, I attributed my disinterest to early menopause, since we only engaged in intimacy 2 or 3 times a month, and it was usually a quick affair. However, my ex-husband desired more, and no matter how hard he tried, I just couldn't reciprocate his feelings. He suggested couple counseling, but I stubbornly refused. My selfishness began to emerge shortly after my birthday. A new, slightly younger and attractive manager started working in my office and showed interest in me. At first, I dismissed his advances, but our interactions evolved from casual chats to flirting. Even though I showed him my wedding ring, I couldn't resist responding to his flirtations and started sharing personal details about my life. Gradually, he occupied more of my thoughts. In hindsight, I see that this was an emotional affair, something I didn't acknowledge then. My ex-husband began to notice something wasn't right. We ended up having a big argument, which I believe I started. When he tried to kiss me, I accidentally reacted with disgust. But it wasn't really about him. I was caught up thinking about the other man, and this made me feel really turned off by everything that was happening. At least, that's what I kept convincing myself of. A week after that pivotal day, I arranged to meet the new manager at a cafe with the intention of firmly telling him to leave me alone and put an end to this situation. However, before I could utter a single word, he surprised me with a kiss, and my thoughts went blank. That moment marked the beginning of our 6-month affair. During this time, I noticed myself being more open and enthusiastic with this other man, doing things I hadn't with my ex. I was always ready and seemed more interested, maybe due to the excitement of something new. Meanwhile, my intimacy with my ex lessened, and I started to distance myself, criticizing his small habits and even demeaning him. I'm ashamed of how I acted then. It took my brother telling me about my ex's deepening depression and thoughts of leaving for me to realize the gravity of my actions. Right away, I broke off the affair, left my job, and decided to show my husband love and desire, hoping to mend our relationship and be a better wife. Then, the man I had the affair with came to my house, bringing a box of my office items that I had requested to be sent. During our talk, he asked why things ended. I told him I had to concentrate on my marriage and asked him to go. He asked for one more meeting, and sadly, I said yes. We went to the guest room and things got intense, making me lose track of time. Suddenly, my ex walked in. My affair partner pulled back abruptly, hitting the wall with a loud noise. My ex had bloodshot eyes, tears rolling down, and trembling lips showing deep hurt. I was completely disgusted by the situation. When the other man tried to leave, my ex confronted him. The man warned my ex to back off, but my ex couldn't hold back and attacked him. I yelled and begged my ex to stop. In a panic, I tried to intervene by jumping on his back, but ended up getting thrown to the ground. For a while, everything seemed blurry and sounds were muffled. When things became clear again, my ex had subdued my affair partner and was on the phone. I was just staring at the other man's bruised face and teeth on the floor. There was a loud knock, and my ex put the phone on speaker, set it down, and knelt with his hands behind his head. The police burst in and handcuffed him. Soon after, paramedics showed up. I found out he had called 911 himself. At the hospital, the situation got even worse. My dad was silent, looking ashamed, while my brother was furiously yelling at me. He looked heartbroken, asking how I could hurt my ex like that. My mom tried to soothe me, saying things would get better, but this made my dad raise his voice at her. His family was furious. His sisters threatened me, and his parents looked like they wanted me to suffer. I tried to talk to my kids, but they wouldn't respond. My sons wouldn't even look at me. At the same time, the man I had the affair with was badly hurt and needed surgery to fix his face after the fight with my ex. At the hospital, a woman suddenly came into my room and started attacking me. My brother had to pull her off. She was the wife of the man I had the affair with. I didn't know he was married. He never wore a ring or mentioned it. This made me feel even more guilty. Before the trial, my sons stayed with their grandparents on my ex's side, and my daughters stopped talking to me. My ex didn't want to see me either. When I tried to visit him in jail, they wouldn't let me. My brother, who worked at the correctional facility, arranged for my ex to be transferred there so he could watch over him. When I asked my brother to pass a message to my ex, he angrily told me to go to hell. During the trial, seeing my ex for the first time in 3 months, his anger was so intense it hurt more than I could have imagined. He had always looked at me with love, even when we argued, but now it was pure hatred. I had to leave to cry in the bathroom. Time went by, and I had to share the details of my affair in court, in front of everyone. When I told them how long it had been going on, my ex looked devastated, and my dad left the courtroom suddenly. Hearing my ex's testimony, I found out he had planned to surprise me with lunch and a weekend trip to the Catskills. He had a whole romantic weekend planned but walked in on us instead. When the other man told him to move, my ex snapped and attacked him, stopping only when he pushed me away. He called 911 right after, and in court, we heard his painful voice and sobs on the recording as he talked to the operator. It was incredibly sad. The man I was with couldn't speak in court because of his medication, so they showed pictures of his injuries. Seeing them made me feel sick. It was my fault my ex had hurt him so badly, breaking his eye socket, cheekbones, and jaw, with some bone pieces too small to fix. My ex got 7 years for a third-degree felony. My sons protested the sentence, and my daughters and his family's cries of pain are something I still can't forget. The first 3 months were incredibly hard. My affair partner's ex-wife sued me for alienation of affection. My ex filed for divorce, my oldest son moved out, my other son stayed in his room all the time, and my twins were really acting out. My ex's sisters confronted me in a store, and his mom spat at me when I tried to apologize. My dad and brother wouldn't talk to me, and even my childhood friends were split on the issue. I had to find a new job because we had no money coming in and our savings were almost gone. But I was pretty much blacklisted in my field because of all the bad press at the accounting firm, so I started working in retail and got a seasonal job at H&R Block. During tax season, I almost lost our house. My ex wouldn't let me visit him, and he sent back all the letters I wrote without opening them. I ended up crying in the shower almost every day. My parents' marriage suffered because my mom kept defending me, and my brother acted like I didn't exist. The guilt was crushing, and I started thinking about just disappearing and leaving everything behind. After some time, I decided to see a therapist, who told me I had become too laid back with my ex. She said I saw him more as a friend with benefits than a husband, and she was right. I was too comfortable with him. To me, he was a companion, but he still viewed me as his wife, the mother of his children, and the woman he loved. I had definitely taken him for granted. A whole year passed, a year where my children didn't talk to me. Whenever I made dinner, they would just take their food to their rooms, not even looking at me. I broke down several times, begging them to talk to me, but they stayed quiet. My brother got married, and I wasn't invited, although my kids were. I kept trying to visit my ex, hoping he would let me see him, but I was always turned away, and he never opened my letters. Deep down, I knew I deserved the depression that had taken over me. Suddenly, my brother showed up one day, the first time I'd seen him since the trial. I was happy to see him, but he wasn't there to make up. He came to scold me. He told me that my ex had been injured in the prison infirmary after trying to fight off another prisoner who tried to be intimate with him. My ex got injured in the stomach, and the other inmate ended up with a broken spine. My brother blamed me for what happened and left angrily in his truck. I cried for days because he was right. It was my fault. I tried to visit my ex in the infirmary, but they wouldn't let me for another 4 years. I kept writing letters, but they were all sent back. Luckily, our kids visited their dad often, and I found out from them that my brother had gotten him into protective custody after the attack. As time went on, my oldest went to the same college and chose the same major as my ex, but he only talked to his siblings and stayed away from me. He didn't come home for the holidays, preferring to go to his grandparents' house. My other son did the same, going to the same college and avoiding me. My twins were hard on me, but visiting their dad regularly seemed to help their mood. When they acted out too much, their uncle would step in to help. Still, my brother and I barely talked. I tried to visit his wife when their first child was born, but they asked me to leave. My mom kept me updated on their lives, while my dad continued to act like I didn't exist. Then, in early May this year, my kids came home for 4 months. I didn't know why, but I was just happy they were there. I tried to show how sorry I was, even though they mostly ignored me. Gradually, they started talking to me again. It was great to catch up with them and hear about their lives. My oldest was in a relationship for over a year, my second son was on the college track team, and my daughters were talking to me again. Seeing the pain I caused them made me feel even more guilty. Watching them smile, joke around, and have dinner together made me yearn for what we lost. As August drew to a close, I eagerly anticipated my twins' first day of their senior year, which coincided with their 18th birthday. I shared my enthusiasm for their birthday celebration and outlined my plans. Surprisingly, my girls requested to celebrate it on a different day without hesitation. Their request left me bewildered because I thought we were making progress in rebuilding our relationship. When I inquired about their reasoning, one of them responded, "Because Dad is throwing us a party and I don't want you near him." This statement caught me off guard, and I sought clarification on when their father had been released. They informed me that he had been released at the end of April due to good behavior. Tears welled up in my eyes upon hearing this news, and it shattered me further. Their increased presence in the house was a result of his return. Their happiness and contentment stemmed from having their father back in their lives, not from the progress we were making in healing. They had him back. I asked about his living arrangements, and they disclosed that he was residing with my brother. I attempted to contact my brother, desperate for a conversation, but he refused. I made an effort to visit, clutching the letters that had been returned over the years, and caught a glimpse of him briefly through the partially open door. I called out his name, but my brother requested that I leave. I handed him the letters and departed. As I reached the driveway, I heard his voice. I turned around and he was approaching me. Tears streamed down my face and I moved to embrace him. He returned my letters, uttering coldly, "You forgot this." And I wept as I watched him walk away. I begged and pleaded for him to talk to me, but he simply retreated into the house. My children stood by the door, gazing at me with an absence of affection in their eyes. In that moment, I realized that my children were merely tolerating my presence. Nevertheless, I maintained a fervent desire to mend our fractured bonds. I yearned to confess my selfishness, express how much I had missed him, and convey my profound remorse for dismantling what we once shared. So I continued to navigate my daily life, hoping for an opportunity to make amends. I learned from my mother that my affair partner's ex-wife had visited my ex 2 years ago and was still making periodic visits. Honestly, I cared little about that. My sole wish was for him to somehow forgive me, engage in conversation with me, stand by my side, and regard me with the same affection as before. I longed for my children to stand with us, and I harbored a deep yearning to reunite my family, even though I recognized that I didn't deserve it. Even if by some miracle we were to reconcile, it could never be the same. I had acted selfishly, and I wished fervently that I could undo it all. Now let's take a look at the community's perspective. In the first opinion, there's sympathy for my ex-husband, recognizing the emotional misuse and dismissive behavior I inflicted upon him. The advice here emphasizes the importance of seeking support from friends who will hold me accountable for my actions rather than condoning them. It's suggested that therapy is needed. Opinion number 2 suggests that I should stop trying to reconnect with my former family members and those who have distanced themselves from me. The advice is to live my life and move forward. These opinions reveal the complexity and seriousness of the situation, underlining the need for self-reflection and personal growth. It's essential to avoid actions that might come across as harassment. Sometimes it's crucial to recognize when certain situations have reached an irreparable point. In opinion number 3, it's acknowledged that my children have cut off contact, possibly because my twins are still underage and living with me. The gravity of the situation, where my family essentially lost their father and my ex lost years of his life in a hostile environment, is recognized. This opinion sees my letters and apologies as ineffective and advises me to respect my ex's choice, focusing on my own mental health and my relationship with my children. The idea of returning to the way things were is deemed unrealistic, and it's recommended to be realistic about the future of my relationship with my ex. In summary, opinion number 3 advises acceptance of the situation, personal growth, and a focus on rebuilding relationships with my children.
All right, that was a fun story. Now let's move on to another exciting one. Stay tuned and let's dive in.
I, 28-year-old man, recently went through a divorce with my ex-wife, 25-year-old woman, after being married for 2 years. I first met my wife when we were in college. At that time, I was ahead of her in class, and after becoming friends, I graduated, but we kept in touch. Luckily, I quickly found a well-paying job a few months after graduating. During this period, my wife and I grew closer, and I occasionally provided her with financial support to help her with her needs. Even though we weren't officially dating, we became intimate, essentially having a friends-with-benefits relationship. Over time, I developed strong feelings for her, and we eventually started dating officially. While we were dating, our relationship had its fair share of highs and lows. Looking back, I should have seen these challenges as warning signs. However, because I was deeply in love with her, I believed that my positive influence would eventually lead to her changing for the better. I wasn't the type of boyfriend who constantly argued or fought, but my wife often was. She would argue about virtually everything, even over trivial matters that shouldn't have resulted in arguments. She had a defensive personality and struggled to admit when she was wrong, even when it was clear she had made a mistake. Despite these challenges, we continued dating for 2 years, with a few breakups along the way, and eventually we got married. Apart from her defensive nature and difficulty managing her anger, my wife was a good person. She took care of me, met my needs, and looked after our home. Additionally, she excelled in managing finances, which was a skill I lacked. However, in the first year of our marriage, a situation arose that nearly tore our marriage apart. I had a female colleague at work with whom I was close. We would have lunch together, and sometimes I would give her a ride home after work. My wife was not comfortable with this arrangement, despite being familiar with my colleague. No matter how much I tried to explain that there was nothing romantic between my colleague and me, my wife remained unconvinced and disapproved of our interactions. One day after work, I offered to give a few of my colleagues a ride to the bus station, as I often did. A female friend of mine chose to sit in the front with me. Unexpectedly, my wife suddenly emerged from where she had been hiding and physically attacked my female colleague. She caused a chaotic scene at my workplace, and I almost lost my job due to her actions. My wife seriously injured my female colleague, even pulling out her hair. Ultimately, I had to cover all the hospital bills and pleaded with my colleague not to press charges. This incident was one of the most embarrassing moments of my life. When I confronted my wife at home, she showed no remorse. Instead, she claimed she knew I was cheating on her and hurled insults at me. I couldn't fathom where all these accusations were coming from because I had never been unfaithful to her, not even when we were dating. I made a sincere effort to remain faithful, but she would accuse me of infidelity at the slightest opportunity. But the problems didn't end there. She constantly invaded my privacy. I often woke up to find her going through my phone, and if I protested, she would hand me her phone and tell me to go through it as well. For 2 years, I endured this, believing that her behavior stemmed from insecurity and a fear of losing me because she loved me so much. Little did I know that she had been steadily cheating on me and deceiving me the entire time. Furthermore, when she handed me her phone, I never actually checked it because I trusted that she had nothing to hide. In reality, she had secrets hidden away. My line of work required occasional travel to meet with clients, and every time I informed my wife about an upcoming trip, it inevitably led to an argument. The primary reason for these fights was her claim that I didn't spend enough time with her, and she disliked my frequent traveling. So, the last time I traveled, this was before I discovered her hypocrisy. I finished my business with a client a day ahead of schedule and decided to return home to surprise my wife, knowing she wasn't pleased about my travels. When I arrived home, the house was quiet, but I noticed a pair of sneakers in my living room that didn't belong to me. As I walked down the corridor, I saw a shirt just outside our bedroom door. The bedroom was slightly ajar, and when I opened it to investigate, I found my wife and my closest college friend in bed together. They were both unclothed and cuddled up, sound asleep and snoring, indicating they had just been intimate. Wow! I was completely shocked and devastated. I couldn't believe that my wife, who had accused me multiple times of cheating when I was innocent, was actually having an affair with my friend. In that moment, I felt a strong urge to confront them, but I realized that doing so would only make things worse. Instead, I took out my phone and discreetly snapped several pictures of them. Then I left the house. While they were still asleep, I shared their pictures in my wife's family WhatsApp group and sent them to our close friends and even the people who knew my college friend. By the time they woke up, almost everyone in our social circle had seen those pictures and sent them angry messages. Shortly after, my wife realized what was happening and called me to ask if I had received any pictures from an unknown number. I told her that I had given her up that evening to collect her things and leave my house. When I said that, she understood it was me, and instead of getting defensive like I expected, she started pleading with me on the phone. She claimed it wasn't what it seemed and couldn't explain how it had happened, but I didn't buy into her excuses. After I shared the pictures with my friends, some of them confessed that they knew about my wife's infidelity. I was stunned that some of my friends had known about my wife and my friend cheating on me, but had never said anything. I was furious and decided to cut them off completely by blocking them. As for my wife, she begged me not to make a decision that would ruin our marriage, despite having already destroyed it with her infidelity. I had grown tired of her and her manipulation, and I didn't hesitate to divorce her. As someone mentioned before, I'd like to emphasize that some women aren't worth the sacrifices men make for them. It's still hard to believe that while I was trying my best to be a good husband to her, my wife had been cheating on me since the first year of our marriage, and I never suspected a thing. She went so far as to paint me as the villain all the time, while she was having an affair right under my nose with my friend. Speaking of him, I cut all ties with him, and as I share this story, I consider him dead to me, along with my friends who watched my wife cheat on me but never said anything. I've made up my mind never to marry again. Marriage isn't worth all the stress and drama, and it's better to be a single and free man than to be married to a manipulative and unfaithful cheater.